Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey, everybody, Mark and Steve on the PBSE podcast. This is episode 234. How does an addict get to real, lasting sexual and emotional sobriety and recovery? And we took a look at that title and said, whoa, that's big, huge. Are we going to cover that in a podcast?
We're going to try. We're going to do our damnedest.
But the reason we came up with that title is we're also doing something we don't normally do. We're going to actually tackle 2 questions, 2 situations, 2 sets of questions that came in because they were very similar. And it's where we came up with this title because it came in from 2 addicts in recovery, 2 different guys who wanted to have us address this on PBSE. So I'm just going to summarize real quick their situations, and then we're going to jump into this topic. So this first guy, he's been addicted to porn since he was 14 years old, and then he carried it way into his adult years. Now he's been in a relationship for, it sounded like, 3 years or more. And his addiction is just now coming out. And he actually says in his submission to us, he says, since then, I've lied about recovery. I've been active in addiction while supposedly practicing recovery. I've gaslit, verbally and psychologically abused my partner for years. I lied in my disclosure and also failed a polygraph test. I triangulated her with the therapists and our friends. So I love his rawness and his realness about sharing all that. He's actually gotten to the place where he's finally getting serious about recovery, but he says he doesn't know if they're too far gone. And he actually says, my partner suffered greatly for everything I've done. She's extremely depressed and doesn't know how to feel better. We spend a lot of time talking about all these issues, and even more so when I continue my bad behaviors. She feels hopeless, that I don't love her, that I don't desire her. She believes that I will never be able to love her the way she deserves. And he says, I love her, but I have failed multiple times to show that I desire her and want her. In fact, I'm demonstrating the opposite. So this guy then shares with us that he's gotten into serious recovery, goes to 12-step meetings, he's got a sponsor, he's worked with a CSAT, he's become honest. He says he's sober from porn, but he still feels himself holding back, returning to old behaviors, not being, as he says it, emotionally sober or present and transparent. And he's asking us, I don't know if he was asking this was probably rhetorical on his part. What do I really want? Am I lying to myself about this whole recovery thing? Do I just not care? Am I just being a whiny child? So that was his whole submission. And then we had another guy, the second submission. This guy's actually been in recovery for the last 7.5 years. Goes to multiple 12-step meetings every week. He's working with a CSAT. He's got a really solid outside support system that he connects with every day, right? So this guy's working it 7.5 years.
Yeah.
Then he says, I still act out every 2 to 3 months on average, and I'm not okay with this. Well, it's better than it was before, which is 2 to 3 times a week. It's still frustrating that I have all this experience and wisdom, but I'm not able to surrender this craving. Every relapse feels like a different reason for it, right? Shame, fear, overworked, resentment, pain, exhaustion, needing rest, wanting fun. He says, I need a PhD in psychology to find all the heart issues before they become porn issues. Then he says, my sweet, strong, forgiving wife says she's still in this with me, though divorce is now on the table. I fear the day she wakes up and feels ridiculous that she's still in this relationship. So there's the two scenarios that came in. And you really hear both of these guys they're really coming from a place of a yearning heart, right? Why do I keep screwing up? Why can't I fix this, right? What is thus our title, how does an addict get to real lasting sexual and emotional sobriety and recovery? Most of these guys seem to not quite be able to get there.
Oh, well, this is not a tall order for a 30-minute or less podcast at all.
No, not at all. We can just whip this right out and get it. Yep, all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot to this, right? And as we talk about this, there are a lot of questions come up, right, as part of this bigger topic. Probably the first one that's most relevant to addicts that we ought to maybe just hit on at least briefly, because we've done a lot of other podcasts on this, but is this difference between sobriety versus recovery? Like,
oh yeah, what's the difference between being sober and truly being in recovery?
Yeah, how do they relate, right? Because one is definitely a part of the other, or should accompany the other over the long term, but one is definitely not the other at the same time.
Yeah.
And so when we look at recovery, right, and this whole process that we call recovery for a guy struggling with sexual addiction or compulsion, what it looks like to break out of that, sobriety is definitely one of the hallmarks tied with that. So sobriety itself, right, is an abstinence from a given set of problematic behaviors, right, on a compulsive or unhealthy basis. That's what we would term sobriety. And there are different definitions out there. Mark and I in our offices, when we're working in this context, we typically use the Sexaholics Anonymous definition of sobriety. All of you are welcome to look that up if you'd like. We won't get into that here, but the long and short is that's the abstinence side of this process, right? That is definitely a hallmark and a component of successful recovery or healing, which is the bigger picture, right? It's sobriety is a symptom or a potential symptom of long-term recovery, which is a life shift, is what we talk about in our Dare to Connect program, right? When we discuss this in our offices or in D2C, we talk all the time about sobriety being just one of many things that happens in recovery. In fact, as you navigate the recovery process, we usually talk about in the context that sobriety, in some respects, not in all, but in some respects, starts to take care of itself, meaning a lot of the compulsions to act out begin to reduce, a lot of the compulsivity, the emotional, psychological, chemical pull, all begin to reduce because we're actually working on the underlying issues, causes, conditions, right, that led to sexually compulsive behavior or addiction behavior in the first place.
And we should be really, really super clear, lest anyone misunderstand us. We're not saying that sobriety isn't critical.
Oh, no, for sure.
Right? Because we both tried to be in, quote, real recovery while we at the same time weren't sober.
Yes.
That's a whole podcast in and of itself, right? Yeah. So sobriety is a door you've got to be able to walk through. And at least if it's not I'm completely sober forever, it's got to be a trajectory. You've got to be getting better at it. There's got to be longer periods of time between slips or relapses, but you've got to get sober or none of the rest of this really works. But there is a difference with just between plain sobriety. In other words, I don't do that versus I do all of these things. Mm-hmm. And you've got to get both of those into a collaboration with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, real recovery. And we're, in Dare to Connect right now in our D2C program for addicts, spouses, and couples, we're continuing on what is a couple of months long installment on all things boundaries and boundary related for individuals, for coupleships, all that stuff as a part of this process. And right now we're talking about different categories of boundaries, including kind of the do's side, right? The things that we do to build up, to create, to enhance recovery in the boundary world, but also the things that we abstain from or avoid, or that retract or detract from that, right?
Yeah.
And so this whole, like you said, right, there is this whole list of elements that kind of make up that bigger picture. So what goes into that, right? What makes what's the difference between the two? And I think for me, the first thing that comes up outside of talking about the difference between those two, when I think about real recovery, like that real change process, I think of the term conversion, right? Converting over to a new way of living, or a new way of thinking, or a new way of doing. When I think about just abstinence as a standalone, especially when I wasn't personally invested in it, or maybe not it's not accurate to say I wasn't personally invested, but maybe I wasn't as invested in it for me as I was in stopping causing pain to my wife, or stopping the impact it was having on my job, or on my schooling, or on my whatever. When I was motivated by those, we call them externals, right? That's what I think of when I think of trying to pursue just sobriety. And sobriety, as opposed to conversion, always was a compliance thing for me.
Yes.
Right. It was I gotta toe the line, I gotta walk that many steps, I've gotta stay on this path and keep my nose to it was all about action oriented, but not action oriented as a way to comply with what was required, as opposed to seeking out behavioral change that I wanted to pursue. So one I'm being boxed into, right? The other one, like, I'm chasing after.
Yeah, I love the difference, right? One boxed in, the other you're pursuing it.
Yeah.
Right. And we get into this discussion. A lot of guys will ask us, so I hear that you've got to hit, quote, rock bottom before you can start into real recovery. And I'll just tell you, rock bottom never worked for me.
Yeah.
It does for some guys. Some guys, the consequences get so severe. Partner has said, if there's one more of these acting outs, I'm divorcing you and leaving you. Right. For some guys, I have seen rock bottom and ultimatums have worked for them. But for me and a lot of guys, they don't, because we're what we call bottom walkers. The consequences get really lousy and crappy, and you're on the bottom and you're thinking, now's my changing place. This is where I turn around. Nope. Mm-hmm. I just walked on the bottom, walk along the bottom. And it just never was the magical thing that was the turning point for me. For me, it had to be, I had to get to the difference between what you said, Steve, avoiding and moving away from unwanted behaviors versus embracing and moving toward authentic, desired behaviors. Mm-hmm. What I want instead of what I don't want. The avoiding the don't want never worked for me, because it just kind of kept me in the addict mindset that was a big part of my acting out in the first place. You're not good enough. You're never going to get this. What are you, stupid moron? Why do you keep going back to this, right? Clench the fist, grit the teeth, avoid the void, avoid, avoid. That just kept me stuck. And I realized I needed to figure out, what do I want? What is the higher self? What is the ideal mark? What is the authenticity? And how can I start making steps in that direction instead of moving away from something, moving towards something? That was a big change for me.
Yeah, it kind of hails back to my favorite quote from 12-step literature. The difference between, I think the phrase is, I'm going to butcher it a bit, but it's running joyously towards heaven versus slowly backing away from one's personal hell.
Right.
They're both moving in the same direction, but one is very much it's this pursuit of something we're wanting, we're desiring, right? We have it as the goal in mind, as opposed to the other one. We're still moving in that direction, but what are we doing? We're looking back, we're hesitating, we're kind of, you can almost see it on one's face, like is there any other way to do this other than this? Like there's that.
And the just backing away and avoiding or moving away from it takes immense energy.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. It's when you do end up slipping or relapsing, it's horribly discouraging. And it's just, I found that it wasn't sustainable. I thought it would wear the avoiding and moving away from would wear me out so completely that what would I do? In my exhaustion, I would go back to my addiction to find soothing and relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that does sort of get us closer to the heart of the discussion here on this podcast, which is, what makes real recovery tick. That's another way we could kind of term today's podcast, right?
Yeah.
Like what really makes that tick? Because you and I, as addicts in recovery, Mark and I have had probably thousands of conversations about this over the years that we've worked together, since writing our book to the podcast to Dare to Connect, all the things that we've done so far. But we tried, Mark and I have one thing that is very common in both of our stories. We tried, as raging codependents, we tried to do recovery for literally everyone and everything I think that one could think of outside of us.
Yeah. Yep. Tried to do it so my wife wouldn't leave me. Tried to do it so that God would quit crying every time I screwed up. Tried to do it for my kids. Just lots and lots and lots of reasons, but they all fell short because what I found for myself, and Steve, I know this is true of you because we've worked together a long time. But the guys that we see that make the most, that really make progress and get on a solid trajectory of what we call an upward spiral, it's usually because it's not just not acting out anymore, right? The focus on what am I not doing. We always see with guys that there is this, I call it a change of heart. It's a literal change of heart where something clicks inside, where they're just like, I want to be different. I feel it. It propels me. I feel like I'm jumping in with both feet now, finally. Right? Have you've seen that, Steve? This, not just a change of mind, but a change of heart.
Yes. Well, let's talk about the change of heart thing, because I can already hear people who are listening to this podcast, right? Even as you hear that phrase, it kind of evokes certain thoughts in Christendom, right? Because this change of heart concept is something that gets talked about in many churches in the conservative Christian world, this change of heart process. And that's not to invalidate it, but I want to talk about it from a little bit different point of view from that. Because for me, this is going to out me a little bit, is like, I wish I could sit here and say, oh, I had this godlike change of heart where my higher power, told me I should do something different, and I did it for the goodness of doing something different. I didn't. I didn't. I still don't. If I'm being completely honest, I still don't. I do recovery because I damn well better get something out of it. I'm very selfish about recovery. It's not a charitable act for me. Now, it's not to say that it is working good recovery obviously beneficial to my partner. Yes. Is it beneficial to our marriage? Yes. Has it enhanced our connection? Yes. It's done all of those things. And those are all motivators for me in recovery too. Don't misunderstand, because I clearly vocalize and advocate for all of those things. But none of those things as standalones ever were enough, like you said earlier, to sustain the long-term change. It just didn't do it for me, where I had to get to a point where I think in our book, in the pornography paradox, I think what we termed it was a healthy self. I had to get healthily selfish and kind of a little bit irreverent and say, blank everyone else, including God, including my wife, how do I feel about my state of affairs? Right? How do I feel about my life? Here I am, post relapse, post acting out with porn, with masturbation, with other forms of acting out. How do I feel? Am I better off now than I was 10 minutes ago? Am I more enlightened now? Am I more connected with myself or others? Am I more confident in myself? Am I more right? And as I would look at all those things, and we can talk about the why behind this and how you get there in a second, because I'd love to speak on that. But as I think about that, once I got to a point where I was really being mindful and honest with myself, the answer to all those questions was no, not at all. I was more hollow, more disengaged, more out of touch, more shame-based, less confident, more avoidant of hard stuff. Like it was robbing me in every way. Right. And that, when I started to connect with that in conjunction with all those other things, was when the sustainable change happened. And I started to, I think, really make progress from moving out of this place of not acting out towards actually healing.
Yeah.
Right. From one to the other.
Well, and I like the way you described getting to kind of a stubborn, putting your foot down. And, for me, it was, because I never deserved to be recovered. I'd never felt I deserved to be anything but a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm.
You finally get so tired of wallowing around in all of these behaviors and all the aftermath of them, which you named. And I finally just found myself getting so sick and tired of it. I finally just put my foot down one day and just said, damn it, no more. Right? I deserve a better life. I deserve to step into my higher, more authentic, truer self. I'm sick and tired of the duplicity of feeling one thing in my soul and doing another on the outside. I'm so tired of that, right? I just got sick and tired of being the false self. I got sick and tired of being Mr. Hyde. And I wanted to step more and more over to the true, higher, authentic, happy, peaceful, fulfilled, confident self. Mm-hmm. I wanted it for me. And I don't know before then if I ever wanted anything for me that was not addiction related.
Yeah. No, and that stems to all sorts of deeper issues, right? This is the whole big web of recovery, because it is a catch-22, admittedly, right? Like you and I talk about this all the time, and we talk about it in our offices. We need to be able to invest in ourselves in healthy ways for this process to really work. But in order to invest in ourselves, we have to be worth something.
We have to be worth
something. And the guys that you and I work with early on in the process do not do that.
No.
Right.
Well, and your bad, selfish, narcissistic, gaslighting behaviors prove that you're not worth anything good. Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Anybody.
Right? We have all the evidence in the world as to why we're no good and we can't make it, and we're not going to, thrive, or why we're not worth it, or what, the list goes on. So that's a whole other kind of a podcast. But I think that where it does center, and if I was to give some starting steps, I mean, when I think it sometimes is this simple. Sometimes it really does mean sitting down and just beginning with maybe something as easy as a really basic pros and cons list, right? Like those basic questions that I just asked myself. Now, again, mindfulness is a skill set, and we have a whole other podcast that are dedicated to that topic alone. But if I can just in a quiet moment be able to ask myself, not just outright after a relapse, but also after a couple of days of sobriety, what is my emotional state in X, Y, and Z areas, right? And maybe it's not even coming at it from just that place. Maybe it's coming from that place of, look at the vision that you have for yourself. Now, for a lot of addicts, that the first step there may be cultivating a vision.
Yeah,
right, because many of us live in that survival place, right? Yep. But if you have a vision to some degree of, and maybe it isn't even just for you, maybe it's your financial future, it's your ability to raise your kids. It could be any number of things. The reality is that in our experience, to all those who are listening, addiction, when it reaches the level that most of you who are probably listening to this have experienced, whether you're an addict or a partner, or if you're like Mark and myself, addiction had pretty much permeated and to some degree poisoned or dramatically altered every area of our lives. God knows we tried to compartmentalize it. We really tried. Oh, we really did. But it just did not work out that way.
Oh, it spilled over into everything.
It did. And when you start to hold up again this viewpoint of where I'd want to be in 10 years in pretty much any avenue of life, it's very difficult for me to think about an avenue of my life at the point where I got into recovery, where I could have done that and honestly said, oh yeah, that's not affecting that in a negative way at all. It was affecting every single one. All of them. I mean, I don't have time to go through it all right now, right? It was affecting all of those. And so I think becoming really well acquainted with two things is a starting point. The first is all of the consequences, or not even the consequences, because that kind of has a negative connotation, but the costs of me continuing on in this behavior,
The cost,
right? Whatever they are.
the outcomes, the results, right?
Yes.
Call it what you will. Yeah.
And then the other side of that, because that's the don't side, which is important, but then also being able to accurately connect with the benefits of not being in that place. And I'll be honest with you, I think for a lot of addicts listening, you'll probably relate to what I'm going to say. That's almost the harder list to cultivate, because most of us are really good at focusing on how crappy we all are and how we failed at all these sorts of things. It's very difficult, I think, for many of us to try to picture a vision of, if I were actually out of this whole mess, this whole addiction mess, like what would my life look like in a year? If I was a year free of all this. And I'm not just talking the acting out behaviors, right? Because every addict, again, who's listening to this, and every partner, you know what I'm talking about. The acting out behavior, isn't that just kind of the tip of the iceberg?
Mm-hmm.
The whole rest of it, what I would term, and this is not an identity that I took on, but there was a set of attributes that I displayed when I was in addict mode. I'll just call it assholery, for lack of a better term, right? That whole list of everything from being defensive to aggressive to passive aggressive to quiet and shut down at times, only to explode a little bit later, to
mopey, depressed, going into the fetal position,
and then completely switching to like moments of pure joy and euphoria, although only to just go back, and right, all of it. The wheel of fortune wheel, as my wife used to call it, of emotions that would just seem to constantly surface in different ways at different times, and there was no way to really track it. Right, that whole lifestyle is what we have to look at when we're talking about, if I was to escape this whole addict world, not just the acting out, but all of that, what could my life be like? Outside of all that insanity?
And we get back to these two guys that wrote us in. The one guy said he's got some sobriety, but he still doesn't have emotional sobriety, as he called it.
Yep.
We would invite you, and all of you who feel closed off or not transparent, you don't share well, you don't recognize your emotions well. What are you moving toward in this process? How do you see yourselves as being a more transparent, authentic person, right? And for this guy and anyone in a relationship, are you daring, and so I would call our program Dare to Connect, are you daring, for example, to engage in behaviors each day that are more transparent, that are more courageous? Are you having a daily couples check-in with your partner where you're expressing whatever it is you're feeling today, raw and real? And if it's, I'm scared crapless to even have this check-in with you, and I never been in touch with my emotions, and I don't even know what to say. Mm-hmm. That's a great early check-in, right? Can you see yourself becoming more transparent, more emotionally expressive, more open, more honest, more authentic, right? That would be where I would start for this guy who wrote us in. It sounds to me like he's doing some of the sober things. He's going to 12-step. He has worked with a CSAT, but how are you seeing the vision of the person that you're evolving into? And are you willing to take little risks and little steps forward each day to be more transparent, more emotionally honest and expressive? Are you putting yourself out there just a little bit and taking the risk each day, moving toward that emotional openness and transparency and authenticity? I would really encourage him to be doing that.
You know, I like that. This is going to sound so out there, but everyone who listens to this knows I'm an analogy guy. What this just made me think of randomly in my head is I remember when I was a little kid. This is just a total memory recall. We didn't talk about this in production or anything, but when I was a little kid, I remember my parents got me my first suit for church. I couldn't have been more than like 9 or 10. And I don't know about other 9 and 10-year-olds, but I'd imagine the vast majority of them probably feel like I do, which is that Sunday clothes suck. And
that's true.
I don't want to wear that kind of stuff. And I remember when I was at the suit store, and they're doing the whole like having you try on the shoes and the jacket, and that you just, not only you're trying all this stuff on, but none of it fits because it hasn't been tailored yet.
Yep.
So you're just like, I'd rather have my teeth pulled right now than this experience. But I do remember, I can't remember if it was the initial try, and I think it was later. I think it was as after they did like the first alteration and then I came back, I do remember seeing myself in the mirror, and I still hated wearing that thing, but I had to admit I looked pretty cool. I
Yeah.
hated wearing that thing, but I will admit I looked pretty cool.
Like
And the
what
reason,
you saw.
yeah, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's kind of an analogy that's just clicking in Steve's brain for, I think, before you can actually wear the suit of recovery, I think sometimes you have to try it on a few times.
Yep.
I think it feels really familiar. It feels very unfamiliar. And honestly, kind of like when I was a little kid, it feels like very, what's the term? Suffocating.
Yeah. Restrictive.
Yeah. All these restrictions, right?
Yeah,
We were talking about this in the addict session today. Boundaries. How often are boundaries talked about just a big list of things that you can't do? That happens in therapy offices all over the globe. And it happens even more in people's personal world when they think of the term boundaries in relationships or whatever. And it's true that there are a lot of don'ts to it, right? Because a suit is restricting in some ways. It just is, right? It'll never be a box. It'll never be a pair of a box or a basketball shorts and a t-shirt. That's my favorite, like, go-to outfit. But at the same time, I don't look that good in basketball shorts and an outfit either. There's a lot of pros that come with wearing a suit that don't come with that other attire. And I think on an emotional level, right, it isn't casual. Recovery is not a casual process. Recovery does require a structure. It does require a little bit of seeing beyond the pale and the forest through the trees, if you will, right? It does require a little bit of buy-in from the people that have gone before. When you attend a 12-step meeting, when you come to a podcast like this, when you hear other people talk about this world of recovery, and because Mark and I know what it's like to hear people talk about that and just feel like they're just talking about a myth, right? But I think that all those little pieces make up the process of kind of trying on pieces of the suit, one piece at a time. And over time, I think we start to become acclimated to even just being open to the idea of, geez, maybe I could have that.
Yeah. Well,
or if I could, what would it be like, right?
And this other guy who's longer in the recovery process, 7.5 years, and he still finds himself relapsing every 2 to 3 months. What we would, as we talk about this moving towards something, becoming in this upward spiral of evolving, we would encourage him, for example, to start to, I call it, pay attention to the breadcrumbs, right? The trail of breadcrumbs, that you start becoming more mindful of the early signs that you're headed towards that relapse. The slightest little disruption in your emotional state. Maybe that you're letting off on the consistency of your daily self-care a little bit. Maybe you haven't been being as transparent and honest about what you're feeling deep down as you could have been, right? I would encourage him to be moving towards paying more attention to the nuances and being very open about those. Because he says he taps into an outside support system every day. Well, what do you share with that outside support system every day?
Totally.
Hey, you know what? I'm feeling a little off today. Or, yeah, I was kind of judging everybody that I was passing on the freeway. That jackass in the Ferrari, boy, he sure thought he was something, right? I'm noticing these little things in my character starting to get a little skittywampus.
Yeah.
And I'm getting really fine tuned to just being a little bit off. And then noticing it, sharing it, leaning in, right? It sounds like this guy the 7.5-year guy needs to dial this stuff in a little bit. He's in the finer tuning dials now. Maybe he's still stuck in the rough approach of old recovery. He's ready to get into the more fine tuning now. Start to pay attention to a lot more of this.
Yeah.
Kind of occurred to me. Yeah.
Well, and I think that so I went back and kind of read that submission again while you were talking, Mark, and it talks about the things that he was doing that he is doing, and I'm just going to speak to this from Steve's experience. So maybe this is inferring too much, but he's been in recovery for the last 7.5 years. He attends multiple 12-step meetings a week, works with a CSAT, has a solid outside support system that he connects with daily. But then he talks about how he acts out every 2 to 3 months on average still. I can reference with that place, having been a 12-step guy for a long time. And again, this is a lot of reading in, but I do hear some good things there, attending lots of meetings, seeing a therapist, right? And having that outside support system, but kind of expand on what you said. What are you doing in all of those things? With your CSAT, has it gotten casual in the therapy world? Is it a chit chat every week? Or is he giving you assignments that you're following through on?
Are you getting way deep down into the peeling back the layers, layer 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 layers deep?
Correct.
To that work.
Right. Same thing with sponsor work. Same thing with just daily recovery work or journaling or all of those kinds of things, right? That there is a big difference. And I've worked both of these kinds of recovery. There is the glossy one, which is attending and being present for all those things, which is, don't get me wrong, I'm not slamming on at all. But then there's the actual boots on the ground work where you get into the nitty gritty of the dirt, the shit, honestly, of all the crap that makes this stuff tick.
Oh, and we could
right.
The glossy, I would call it maybe the comfortable.
Yeah.
It's become pretty comfortable, pretty routine. I check the boxes. Doesn't mean you're not working a good recovery. It just means that you can't stay at one level forever. You've got to keep digging down.
Yeah, I mean, and it has to go deeper. There has to be that consistent, constant challenge.
Yep.
And we totally get it. Not every therapist provides that. Not every support group or sponsor provides that. Let me tell you who does provide that. Dare to Connect provides that.
That's true.
In our Dare to Connect program, it's a rare day where an addict, a partner, or a coupleship walks out of a session without an assignment. I think we've given out something like 15 assignments in the last 4 weeks.
We don't want to discourage any of you from coming over here.
Oh no, of course not. And obviously it's not like a hand pops out of your computer when you're signed into D2C and slaps you across the face if you haven't done your homework.
No, and there are always assignments that are they're geared to in the trenches, boots on the ground. What are all of our people telling us in our live sessions or sending them into us when they listen recorded? We give assignments based on what all of our D2C people are actually going through right now in the trenches of their lives and relationships. It's all very pertinent. It's an
interactive program where you're given specific things to work on, to write about, to ponder on, to share with your partner. Right? It's very quantifiable stuff that all builds on itself in context with the weekly sessions, 4 of them a week, 5 of them actually, including both support sessions. Same thing holds true for our D2C Academy Advanced courses. Same thing holds true for our D2C Vault videos, right? We're just wrapping up our first D2C Advanced course on formal disclosure. It's 19 weeks long. 19 weeks of additional
preparing for.
Yeah, that's preparing formal disclosure, right? That's just getting you ready to access a therapist to do it, right? There's just a wealth of content there. If you are needing to level this process up, because again, I speak from experience for those who are in that situation, again, I know I'm reading a lot into this guy, but if you're in that space, and those of you who are listening know who you are, and you partners who are listening who have partners like this, suspect that you have a partner like this, that would be a great way to level things up, is to get a cohesive program that will take you wherever you are at, and we guarantee you it will kick you into higher gear of the process. Come take a look at daretoconnectnow.com. We've got a 2-week free trial there. You can still claim. We'd love to have you come join us and join us in the program. And rather than, as we say all the time, waiting for 3 months to get something answered on this podcast, let's see. Our next session is on Wednesday. Come get help tomorrow. You can do that, or 2 days from now, right?
2 days, yeah.
We'd love to do that with you. So anyway.
All right. Hey, thanks for being here with us. All of you who do have questions, send them through to pbsepodcast.com. We are way behind, a couple of months behind, but we'll get to them when we can. And if you ever want to search all of our past podcasts, you can go to pbsepodcast.com to the blog, and there's a search feature in the blog, and you can search through all 234 episodes.
Can you believe that?
No, it's crazy.
It's wild. Absolutely wild. We are also starting to upload these to our YouTube channel as well, these episodes. So do take note of that. It's a new feature that we're adding. I know a lot of people, I know that there's kind of a new trend out there with people liking to watch those or have another avenue to access them. You can always listen to these on your favorite podcast platform, but we will have these on the YouTube channel as well. So, all right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will catch you next week.
See ya.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.